Well, welcome to the Holy Land and this biblical site of Hebron. Right now we are looking at the Cave of the Patriarchs, also the Caves of Machpelah. Caves of Machpelah is where Abraham, Sarah, Isaac, Rebekah, Jacob, and Leah are buried. Their tombs are here to this day. Now, because this is such an important place, because the patriarchs, as we call them, the founders of our faith, Abraham being the father of our faith, and then his offspring, because this is so important, this site has been preserved. What you're looking at is a massive building. It has not always been this way. Abraham bought the caves, and then he would be buried there, his wife, and then his children and his daughters-in-law. So David, because David reigned here for 7.5 years, right up on the tell up above up here, we'll point it out to you, then he would preserve this. And then Herod the Great, what you're seeing here is what Herod the Great built. And so Abraham bought this. He bought it, really his first possession in the Promised Land. And then God would give him all of the Promised Land. So we are going to be going up here and exploring this and going inside here and seeing this. And then we're going to be afterward doing a Bible talk about the things that happened right here in Hebron. So I think you're going to find this very, very special. So you ready to explore this? Herod the Great built 3 holy sites. He built this, where we were just at the Oaks of Mamre, and he enlarged the Temple Mount and he redid the temple. Now let's look at a brief history of this monumental site, and then we're actually going to go up into it and see everything in detail. This is going to be really special. You're going to be in the very spot where the patriarchs were buried. This property of the Caves of Machpelah is the first legal land acquisition in the Promised Land. This fulfilled part of the Abrahamic covenant God gave to Abraham in Genesis chapters 12 and 13. So this really is quite amazing. It began to be venerated during the time of the patriarchs who were buried here. Then King David preserved it so it could be remembered and venerated as well. King David was from around 1000 BC. This can be verified by the fact that he built protection walls around Abraham's altar at the Oaks of Mamre that can still be seen today. So it's very likely he would have done the same here at this site. We must realize that Abraham and the patriarchs are monumental in importance in God's master plan. So this site was set aside and valued to an extent that is hard for us to understand. And in fact, it is the second most venerated site to the Jews, the first being the Temple and the Temple Mount. So all throughout the Old Testament period, it would be venerated. This can be verified as there have been found in the caves pottery and artifacts dating back to King David's time and 700 BC. Then Herod the Great, between 31 to 4 BC, built massive walls around the caves, including a floor about halfway up the walls covering the caves. It had access from this floor down to the caves. Later, during the Muslim period, the access would be closed off. Herod built the walls around the caves using the same building stone style as the Temple Mount platform, and the structure he built just a short distance to the north of here at the Oaks of Mamre, where Abraham built an altar. So what we're seeing today, these walls and this structure, is from the time of Herod the Great, 2,000 years ago. And in fact, it is the oldest surviving structure in its entirety complete that Herod built. Now, after the time of Herod, during the Byzantine period, in around 325 AD, Christians built a basilica church on top of the floor inside the walls of the structure Herod built. Then during the Muslim period, in around 650 AD, the basilica church and site were converted into a mosque. During the 10th century, an entrance was pierced through the northeastern wall, some distance above the external ground level, and steps on the southern side of the structure were built going up to this entrance on the northeast corner of the structure. In 1100 AD, after the area was captured by the Crusaders, the enclosure once again became a church. During this period, the Byzantine church and other buildings were remodeled and given new gabled and vaulted roofs with elegant windows. Most of the internal buildings that can be seen today are from this Crusader period. In 1188 AD, the Muslims once again conquered the area, and at this time they reconverted and remodeled the enclosure into a mosque. However, they did allow Christians to continue worshiping here. The red and white building material that can be seen today is from this period. There was also added a minaret at each corner, two of which still survive. And you can see evidence of the others here as well. Samuel ben Samson visited the cave in 1210 AD and records that visitors wanting to see the original caves had to descend by 24 steps in a passageway so narrow that the rock touches them on each hand. In around 1320 AD, during the Muslim Mamluk period, cenotaphs were made to each of the patriarchs and their wives. A cenotaph means tomb memorial or marker. These cenotaphs were evenly spaced out on the floor inside the structure. These markers are not directly over the tombs, but are just markers. There are two caves side by side where all the patriarchs and their wives are buried. However, the tomb marker of Abraham is directly over the caves. From 1267 to 1967, Jews were not allowed any access inside the structure. They were only allowed to approach as far as the 7th step on the southern steps of the stairway that led up to the northeastern corner access of the structure. In 1967, after the Six-Day War, the Jews tore down the southern stair access. However, you can still see evidence of it today. So what we see is that this site has been venerated for nearly 4,000 years. This is really quite amazing. Now we'll talk about some of the discoveries of the caves under the building a little later when we go inside the building. We'll check in with our authority here, make sure we're good. Shalom, shalom. We are from America mainly, yeah. Yeah.
Christian?
Yeah.
Okay, enjoy.
Thank you, thank you. Toda, toda. Now what's really interesting as we approach up here is this was a side hill. You can see it, right? It's a side hill. It's bedrock. It's a lot of limestone, but it's bedrock, it's solid. And so there were these caves up here. So it was an excellent place then for burial because it's not going to be loose dirt, cave like that. It's solid rock type cave. And as we walk over here to the entrance, we'll be able to see some caves. Now you can see these Herodian stones, right? Once again, I mean, Herod the Great, he was a master builder. Unbelievable. It used to be kind of open and then they have enclosed it over the top over the years. Once again, one half of it is a mosque and the other half is a synagogue. And so one side you look at the tombs, then the Muslims will look at it from the other side. But it is barred off, and what you're seeing are the monument to the caves, but the caves are way down below. They're way down deep. We're going to be about halfway or so up. So let's say a shaft that will go down to the caves.
We don't go down.
We don't go down into the caves. So what would happen is then they would put the bodies into caves, and then in time, a year or so, they would decay, and then they'd just have the bones, and then they would then put the bones with the other bones, so to speak. So that's when it talks about being gathered unto your forefathers. That's where they would then gather the bones, and then all the bones would be put relatively together.
Yeah.
In families.
Yeah. So what we're seeing here, they've been brought up from the caves, or it's just a monument?
It's just a monument over,
Okay.
over the caves, yeah. Just a monument over the caves. They have accessed the caves on occasion, but very rarely. I mean, they know they're there, there's no doubt about that. And so now they're just monuments on top of where the caves are going down. So you can see right here what the side of the hill would have looked like. So the tombs are going to be farther in. You can see some caves going down there. So once again, the formation was solid, almost bedrock, so then they could even carve out caves too. So they would take a natural cave and then a lot of times carve it out, or they would just carve out a cave out of the bedrock, because the bedrock limestone in its natural state that's not exposed is not that hard. Once it's exposed, it becomes much more denser and harder. You can see over there some of the carving over there, some chiseling marks. And I want to point out where the Tel Hebron is. So just stop here and turn around. Okay, just come up on the stairs. We're going to use the stairs as a stepping stone so everyone can see. We're going to turn and look. Can't see all of it, but you can see part of the ancient Hebron up on top of the hill up there. From another angle, we'll be able to see over to our right more, but this is some of it to your left. So over to the right over here is where David's going to have his palace and where he's going to reign from for 7.5 years. We'll get it from another angle. We'll go up over here and we'll be able to see it from another angle. But I just wanted to show you a little bit. Ancient Hebron is over there, Tel Hebron. So now we're going to go in here and explore this, see if we can find all the tombs. Okay, so once again, this is a synagogue. Pass it on. It's a synagogue. Guys, have your hats on. I'm not going to be talking real loud. Okay, I'm going to lower my voice down now. All right? We'll try to stay cozy as we go through. So this is a functioning synagogue. It's a lot of it is there's different compartments up here. This is a huge building, so this is a place of study right over here to your right. Well, let's take a moment now that we're in here and talk briefly about the discoveries of the caves under this structure. Really quite fascinating. So there are many eyewitness accounts of those who have visited the caves below the floor of this structure today. These accounts date from around 325 to 1981 AD. I should mention that the floor we are standing on was part of the original structure Herod the Great built. So you're standing on stones dating back to around 2,000 years. It's under this floor where the original caves are located. When Herod built the structure, he erected thick outer walls of protection with a floor about halfway up. Access to the caves was through this floor leading down to the caves, and these accesses are on the Muslim side of this structure in the Isaac and Rebekah Hall area. The word Machpelah means double or side by side. This can refer to the two caves that are side by side, or where the three patriarchs and their wives were buried side by side. Access to the caves is not permitted today. However, the most recent accounts of Israelis entering the caves take place in 1968 and 1981. In 1967, after the Six-Day War, the area fell into the hands of the Israeli Defense Forces. In 1968, Moshe Dayan attempted to regain access to the tombs. Ignorant of the Serdab entrance, Dayan concentrated his attention on the narrow shaft entrance visible below the decorative grate and had the idea of sending someone thin enough to fit through the shaft down into the chamber and cave below. Dayan eventually found a slim 12-year-old girl named Michael to assist, sending her into the chamber with a camera. She was able to see some things underground, but was unable to enter the caves as they were blocked by a rock she couldn't move. In 1981, Save Jevin, the former director of the Israeli Antiquities Authority, entered the caves by the Serdab access using chisels to remove the sealed-up entrance, and discovered the square stone in the round chamber that concealed the cave entrance. He found a passage leading to a second oval chamber, smaller than the first, which contained shards of pottery and a wine jug. Findings published in the Israel Exploration Journal in 2020 stated that the pottery dates from the time of King David and to around 700 BC and originated from various locations in the Hebron and Jerusalem areas. In 1994, after a bloody massacre, the site was divided between Muslims and Jews to maintain peace. However, for a short time each year, the site is fully open to each group for 10 days. Okay, so go ahead and just come on in, and we'll pause right here. Here on your left is the tomb of Jacob. Tomb of Jacob. Jacob, how do you say it? Jacob. 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 Okay. So this is a very revered place. Okay, so this is, then going down is going to be the cave down underneath, okay, where it's actually at. This is above where the tomb is, where the cave is. Okay, so we'll just come through. You can take pictures if you like. Here isn't really marked. Yeah, this is the tomb of Esau. Esau. Yeah, it's not marked.
Okay.
Jacob's brother.
Yeah, that's why it's like that.
So you can take some photos. This is the tomb of Esau, Jacob's brother.
Oh, Kalish.
Okay, so now we're going to continue on in here. So then as you're coming in to your right, you can see this. This is the tomb of Abraham. Tomb of Abraham. This is where Sarah's tomb is. This is Sarah. So you start off with Jacob, Abraham, Sarah. Okay, so this is Sarah. You have to step in to see it. Just go in and do a little U. Go in, take your pictures, and then you can come back out. Step over here. Lighting candles in honor of the patriarchs. Now, did you notice in the underneath there? So this building used to be open, but they've covered part of it. So this is like Crusader architecture here, where they covered part of it. So we got some people studying here, so we'll show respect. Shalom, 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 toda, toda. You see the caves in there? It's kind of a little jigsaw puzzle in here. So here we have, this is the tomb of Leah, so you can come in, and we can't do a circle here, so we'll just do a little, we'll have a little single file line coming in and a single file line going out. You can come in, take your time. So Isaac and Rebekah's tomb is back in here, but it's closed right now. It's closed. Anyway, this is the place where then that the patriarchs are buried. Well, once again, you can see it's a functioning synagogue, and they do a lot of study. Have you had a chance to look at their libraries? Yeah, they have a lot of writings. A lot of them are the Mishnah and Talmud. So they're commentaries and writings. And so from the Mishnah, then we're able to learn about the size of the Temple Mount, from things like that. So the Jews were very meticulous in their record keeping. That's another reason why some would say that the Temple Mount was down in the city of David, because the Jews forgot. The Jews did not forget where the temple was. They were commanded not to. If I forget you, O Jerusalem, may my tongue stick to the roof of my mouth. They did not forget where their temple was, because we've heard them say it from their mouths, this foundation stone, right? To them, the ark was placed right over what they believe was the cornerstone or foundation stone of the universe. So God began right there, and from there he created the universe. That's their belief. They didn't forget that, and they're not going to build the temple anywhere else but there. They can't. It's the center. All right, well, we'll just kind of casually back on out. But you'll notice a lot of these, the Jews, they will come in here and spend time. They will study. You see these libraries here? See, not everybody's going to have these in their homes. So then this would be an opportunity where you would come here to the synagogue, then you would learn and read. We'll get up here to the end and we'll pause. Okay, so once again, this is a synagogue, and what I want you to really consider is all of their books. Once again, look at all of their books. This is just a fraction of them. Did any of you have a chance to go down under the arch by the western wall? So, in the same way that the Jews don't own all these books, there might be a few rabbis that are going to own these books, but most of the Jews don't own all these books. So they're going to go to the synagogue to learn and read. That's the way it was with the Bible before we had the printing press. The scrolls would be kept in the synagogue. You had to go to the synagogue then to learn and read. Now, some very wealthy might have some books of the Bible, but once again, you had to go to where the Bible was. You didn't carry it on your phone. Couldn't just listen to it. So we are extremely, extremely blessed this day. I mean, on my phone alone, through these apps, I have almost every language the Bible has been translated in. It's just unbelievable. So again, for the printing press and in the time of Jesus, you went to the Bible. You went to these writings. In the same way today, they come here to the writings. Okay, I want you to gather around over here. Shalom. I just wanted to say, they pause now, but you have a rabbi teaching his disciples right here. Now let's make our way to the area where we're going to do our Bible and faith lesson talk. Well, now we're coming to our Bible time here at the Caves of Machpelah. Once again, Abraham, Sarah, Isaac, Rebekah, Jacob, and Leah are buried here. Also inside, we do have a tomb to Esau. The Bible seems to be silent about that, but anyway, the tomb is in there. I want you to look right over my head here, right through the palms, and right up there is Tel Hebron up on top of the hill up there. That is then where David would build a palace, and he would reign for 7.5 years here in Hebron, looking over the caves of the patriarchs. That's his lineage. That's his roots. And so he preserves the caves as well. And then as we've seen, then David's going to preserve it. The kings are going to preserve it. Herod's going to preserve it. Byzantine church is going to preserve it. The Crusaders and the Muslims and then on. So this is an authentic place. As we've talked, it's large and big, but it is so because of its importance. And once again, it's Herod the Great that made this huge structure around it to preserve it. It was special to be inside there and see all that. What we're going to do now is we're just going to look at some of the events that happened here in this Hebron area. We'll have a little overlapping from the talk we did at the Oaks of Mamre, but just a little bit. So Hebron really in the Bible is really an important place. It's mentioned 72 times in the Bible. It was a monumental place. It's in the Negev area, and once again, it's on the travel route that's going to come from Beersheba, the Negev to the south, going all the way. It's going to come through Hebron, it's going to go through Bethlehem, it's going to go through Jerusalem, Gibeon, Bethel, Ai, Shiloh, Shechem, up into the Galilee area. So very, very important travel route that we're on. So after God affirmed his covenant with Abraham, he built an altar to the Lord nearby at Mamre and lived there. And we were just at that place, the Oaks of Mamre. That's where then Abraham will build the altar. And we had the privilege of seeing that altar. So it says in Genesis 13:17, "Arise, walk about the land through its length and breadth, for I will give it to you." Then Abraham moved his tent and came and dwelt by the Oaks of Mamre, which are in Hebron, and there he built an altar to the Lord. So how far away is the Oaks of Mamre? Close by, maybe a mile or so, kilometer or two. So then at Hebron, Abraham learned in a dream that his descendants would go to Egypt as slaves for 400 years. It says in Genesis 15:12, "Now when the sun was going down, a deep sleep fell on Abram." Now his name later was changed to Abraham, right? "And behold, terror and great darkness fell upon him. God said to Abram, 'Know for certain that your descendants will be strangers in a land that is not theirs, where they will be enslaved and oppressed 400 years. But I will also judge the nation whom they will serve, and afterward they will come out with many possessions.'" So we have this dream that Abraham dreams, or Abram dreams. His ancestors are going to go to Egypt, spend 400 years as slaves. Now, how long were the Israelites in Egypt? 430. How long were they slaves? 400. 30 years they enjoyed peace, then they became slaves. So we have this prophecy that is given through Abraham. Once again, prophecy tells us God's word is true. I was having a conversation with Janice somewhere wherein today a lot of pastors don't talk about prophecy. They don't. The book of Revelation, I've only heard preached once, as far as preaching through it. Pastors today, for some reason, stay away from prophecy, but it's estimated that around 30% of the Bible, when it was written, was prophecy. So, also it says in Scripture that those who have this hope in them, they purify themselves. So when you see what's going to happen, these prophetic events, it is a sense in which it purifies you. So prophecy is good. Be students of prophecy. At Hebron, Ishmael was born to Abraham and Sarah's handmaid Hagar. So this happened here at Hebron. And near Hebron, God made a covenant with Abraham that he would be the ancestor of a multitude of nations. So what you'll see in Genesis is you'll see this Abrahamic covenant reaffirmed a number of times. At Hebron, Abraham offered hospitality to 3 servant angels of God and received the promise of a son. Who was that son? Isaac. It says in Genesis 18:10, they said to him, "Where is Sarah, your wife?" And he said, "She is in the tent." The Lord said, "I will surely return to you about this time next year, and Sarah, your wife, will have a son." So interestingly here it says that we have these servants that come, and then it says here the Lord spoke to Abraham. So what you'll see is that God will use these angels and he'll speak through them. And then it says, and Sarah was listening at the tent door behind him. Now Abraham and Sarah were old, advanced in years. The way of women had ceased to be with Sarah. In other words, she was beyond years of childbirth. So Sarah laughed to herself, saying, "After I am worn out and my Lord is old," her Lord in this context is Abraham, "shall I have pleasure?" The Lord said to Abraham, "Why did Sarah laugh and say, 'Shall I indeed bear a child now that I am old?' Is anything too hard for the Lord? At the appointed time, I will return to you about this time next year, and Sarah will have a son." Around 25 years after the promise was given to Abraham and Sarah that Sarah would have a child, the promise was fulfilled. Then later, Abraham, Isaac, Rebekah, and Jacob, and Leah would also be buried here at the Caves of Machpelah. So then that ends Abraham's chapter here. And then Jacob, this is Isaac's son. Then he is going to return back after he steals the birthright from Esau. Then Jacob is going to flee to Paddan Aram. He's going to have the dream on the rock there at Bethel. And so he's going to go there upon his return after 21 years in Paddan Aram with his wife Rachel and Leah. Then he's going to return back and he's going to live here in Hebron. And then Joseph, this is Jacob's son. Joseph was sent from Hebron to Shechem, where he would be sold into slavery and taken to Egypt. So this prophecy that Abraham has then is going to be fulfilled several generations later. So then Joseph, Jacob's going to send him up to Shechem because his brothers are tending sheep up there. Once again, they're nomads. They will have home bases, but they're nomads. So Joseph goes up there, and then his brothers, they hate him because of the dreams that he's had about how God's going to use him. And so then he's sold into slavery, taken by the Midianites down to Egypt, and then Joseph would serve in Egypt, become next to the Pharaoh in power. And then when he dies, he makes his children promise him that when they are taken out of Egypt, and this would be 400 years later, that they would take his bones with them. And they did, and they buried him in Shechem. Shechem. Nearby to Hebron, 2 of the spies who researched the promised land returned with a large cluster of grapes. So when the Israelites left Egypt, they went to Mount Sinai. They spent about a year at Mount Sinai, and then they came to Kadesh Barnea, which is in the Negev, would be southwest of us here a ways. They camped there. And then Moses sends the 12 spies out to search the promised land, and they come back and 10 of them give a bad report, right? Caleb and Joshua give a good report that we can conquer these people. We can do it. The others said we can't do it. They're too big for us. Well, when these spies were returning back after spying out the land, they took a cluster of grapes from here in Hebron that was so big it took 2 people to carry them. And as we drove into Hebron, and as we leave, we saw a lot of vineyards, right? We're in May, so now vines are growing up, little bitty clusters of grapes on them, but Hebron is known for its vines. Then after the Israelites then wander 40 years, and then they do come into the promised land, then Caleb, who was one of the good spies, where was his possession? Right here in Hebron. And what I like about Caleb, we're talking about him a little bit in our faith lesson, is he was 80 years old. He had tolerated a lot. He had the faith to go into the promised land. And so then he had to put up with the disobedience of the others for 40 years. And then they conquered the promised land. And after that, then he received his inheritance. And when it came for him to conquer Hebron, what did he say? He said, "Give me that mountain." This is Hebron, a mountain. Give me that mountain. He's 80 years old. So he did conquer the mountain, and he took it for his possession. And then Samson, in the period of the judges, this is after the conquest of the promised land, then Samson, he's one of the judges, a very spiritually immature person, as we learned, right? Then he goes down to Gaza, and then they want to capture him. And what does he do? He gets up, he takes the whole gate and the pillars from Gaza, which is basically west of here, all the way up here. He carries them on, it says, a hill across from Hebron. Now, do you know what the elevation of Hebron is? It's about 3,000 feet or 1,000 meters. It's one of the highest places on this mountain range that runs north and south from the Negev up to the Galilee area. So he carries these beams up here and sets them down up here. Then also later on, David would be anointed king over the southern part of Israel here in Hebron. And then he would serve for 7.5 years, and then he would become king over all of Israel. So after Saul died, there was some questioning of who's going to be the king. So David was the king down here in this area for 7.5 years, and then he would become king over all of Israel, and then he would then take his headquarters from here to where? Jerusalem. He would conquer the Jebusite city fully, and then he would set up his palace and his kingdom center in the city of David. And that's where he then would reign for another 33 years. He reigned 40 years in total. Then his son would then build the temple, and time would go forward. So what are some faith lessons that we can learn from this place here at Hebron? Well, we'll focus a little bit on the fact that here in this area is where God gave the covenant promises. And Abraham was tested. It took a long time for his son to be born, so he was tested. What about us? When God gives us promises, do we waver and doubt, even though they might not come in our time, or do we hold strong? Maybe sometimes we might doubt about the hope we have in heaven. Is it all real? Is it really going to be that good? One of the things I see as I get older is how passionate we are about staying here on this earth. The number one fear everyone has is about their health and about dying. But the promise that we have of eternity in heaven and paradise is something that we want to hold on to and not hold on to this. That's what we want to have our eyes on, is eternity and our time there. So do we wave in our hope and our faith? And then Caleb was a person who retained his faith. He did not lose sight of it, and he had to tolerate the disobedience of others, but he maintained his faith, and even in his old age, he didn't lose his passion. He said, "Give me that mountain." So one of the things that I notice, and I am guilty of it as well, the older you get, you can get tired, and you can kind of maybe step back, and you can not be as passionate. Now, obviously our bodies get old as we get weak, we can't do as much, but we certainly don't want to lose our fervor and our passion for the Lord. And we've talked about this in other talks. Unfortunately today, a lot of people in their golden years use those years for themselves and not for building Christ's kingdom. So when we get the most mature, the most knowledge, the most experience, then sometimes we neglect using that for God's kingdom, and we just kind of become lazy. So we don't want to do that. We want to be like Caleb. We want to use our golden years to pursue God's kingdom and to store up true gold. David was anointed king here. Why was David anointed king when the first king that Israel had was who? Saul. What was the end of Saul? What was Saul's problem? He was jealous, continually presumed upon God's grace. We learned about him in Bethshean, right? David was just the opposite. So the first king that Israel had was a jealous, self-serving king. And then God chooses David, who it says was a person after God's own heart. So David is going to accomplish great things. He's not perfect, but he's going to accomplish great things. So we should be people after God's own heart. If we ask people to tell us about you, what would they say about you? Are you a person like David after God's own heart? That's our goal. And it takes discipline and it takes strength to do that. And we've talked in other videos about spiritual disciplines and how important they are. Well, how special to be here. No, once again, we were just at the Oaks of Mamre. We're just a stone's throw away, the caves where the patriarchs were buried. So it's really special. We can look up and we can see where David's palace, where he reigned for 7.5 years. And so this Hebron, once again, this area is the roots of much of the Old Testament. Because again, Abraham is our father of faith. So thank you, and may God richly bless you.